minute late. Also, tonight we are microdosing Baja Blast that can now be bought in bottle form. I drank half of it the other day. Gonna drink the other half right now. Let me get the TikTok people set up. I was just like literally chilling in my living room, having the time of my life, totally forgetting it was Tuesday. Oh, you're on 5% battery? What a fucking shocker. What else is new? And my scalp and face is very dry right now, and it's like actually sending me into orbit. Load, please. No? Okay. Why would it work? Because why would it work? You're done. You are done. Happy Tuesday. We're actually really not going to talk shit about Henry Ford, which I know will be surprising to many of you. This is so good. I love Baja Blast. So good. Is this about the movie or the automobile? Now I'm hesitant to tell you because I don't want you to leave. It's about automobiles. If I can get my freaking iPad to go live on... How do I just get rid of the picture? I'm just going to take a photo. Fuck you. I didn't want it to work anyway. That works. No, it doesn't. That's horrifying. This is so embarrassing that I'm doing this on live right now. Hate that. We're using it regardless. Okay. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now that me having to take photos of myself on live camera is over, because I just became really self-aware, which doesn't happen to me very often. Thank God. I hate it when it does. There's also dust up here, but I did not like having to do that. So anyway, 2 minutes and we're just now getting started. So sorry about that. Today we're talking about cars, and I don't know, like the spirit of U.S. history just came over me. I don't know if it's because I got to the point in the year. I know what it is. So remember how I've been doing pop culture? I recently got inspired to do more history stuff because I got to the point in the school year where we're learning about stuff that I find really interesting. Like for the first half of the year with my AP kids, it's like kind of giving boring. TBH. So sorry guys if you're watching this, but I did tell them that in class. And now we're to really interesting stuff. So we're talking about stuff that I'm interested in. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much more I want to tell you. So now I'm telling you guys because I don't have time to tell them because we have standardized tests like every 5 seconds. OMG, yay, I love history streams. So yeah, we have much to discuss tonight. We specifically are going to talk about the history of cars in the US. From a very specific perspective. This is not going to be like everything that ever happened, obviously. We have like 2 hours together. So this is really going to be what I found interesting about this. So these are just some car memes that I found. Anti-car people telling people in rural areas that they're part of the problem and just bike 150 miles to the nearest store. Because I think there's a lot of anti-car people out there that are very, very much delusional. They are not living in the world with us, where they're like, I don't have a car. Everyone can live without a car. And I think there's a very specific group of people that can live without cars. Most of them are in cities. Most of them have a decent amount of money, and most of them do not have children. So moving from a car-free life in New York and having to have a car in LA has made, I just almost said La Haas. I was like, where's La Haas? I'm not familiar with that. Having to have a car in LA has made me want to die. I need a car and I hate it. I'm unfortunately like a suburban to my core. I love a car. Like I hate that about me so much. But I think I love a car because I've never lived with really good public transportation. The times in my life that I didn't have a car, I didn't have good public transportation. So I'm like not completely closed off from not having a car. I've just never lived in a situation where it was like logical. And the times that I didn't have a car, it was very frustrating because I lived in a place where I needed one. I miss when they used to be accessories. I hate cars, but they definitely have a place in society. As a disabled person, I'll always have to have a car regardless of where I live. I love having access to a car, but I hate it being my only option. That's how I feel. Because like it is nice with like groceries. That's convenient. I need a car to survive. I'll have a car before I have a place to live if I had to choose. Even Barbie had a car. So we're going to talk about how we got here, how we got to this car mandated hellscape. And for those of you on the Tickety Talk, you need to come to Twitch to be able to have all the fun and see everything. Thanks. So starting off in the 1800s, we're going back very far. Really anything before the Civil War is not that interesting to me. History-wise, like, I'm really into, like, causes of the Civil War, westward expansion, so I won't say the Civil War. I'll say, like, anything before the 1800s. I'm really, like, eh. So we're starting in 1886. We'll actually go backwards in a little bit. But Benz created the three-wheeled motor car known as a motor wagon. This is often considered the first truly modern automobile, but it was not the first automobile, as we will discuss. He applied with a patent for a vehicle powered by a gas engine. So by our definition of what we think of as a car, most of us drive gasoline-powered cars. This is when that came to be in 1886. Later that year, oh my God, I have to move the iPad. I can't see my slides. Later that year, the Benz motor car patent model number 1 made its first public outing. It was powered by an internal combustion engine. I don't know what any of this means. Like, if you thought you were going to come on here and have like a woman intelligently speaking about mechanics, I'm so sorry. This is not the place for that. I'm an idiot. A three-wheeled four-cycle engine and a chassis form a single unit. But that's their patent in the Library of Congress. They are while Benz is widely created for the automobile invention, it's hard to pinpoint a single creator for the car. There have been various other automobiles, steam, electric, and gasoline throughout history that were invented before and after Benz invented his first car. And records back to the 15th century show that even Leonardo da Vinci had created designs and models of transport vehicles, which, like, I don't know why. I feel like that's stretching it. I don't know why I don't believe that. Like, I can't tell you. Like, that is fact checked, but, like, I don't believe it. I don't know what to tell you. It just doesn't sit well with me. So in 1769, we're starting to get to the point in history where I don't really care. The first self-propelled road vehicle powered by steam was invented by Nicholas Joseph Cugno. The first electric carriage was invented by Robert Anderson. So there were some other car-esque things before Benz. Benz was just the first, like, gas car, which I was very shook to know that we had electric cars before we had gas cars. Isn't that surprising to you? Where's the car equals house on the syllabus? No, I broke my streak of being on time because I forgot daylight savings time exists. And I live in Arizona. Oh, no. Oh, I bet that. Oh, my God, because Arizona doesn't do daylight savings time. I used to have a roommate that was from Arizona, and she was like a little for other reasons. But I remember her first daylight savings time. She was really having a hard time. She was like, this is terrible. I was like, yeah, it is. Welcome. So anyway, back to Cars, the musical. What would you do if I just started breaking out in song and dance? I would never do that, by the way. So I wanted to get into electric car lore. I know that that's really not what we were meant to be doing here, and I kind of got a little distracted, but I felt like it was so interesting what happened with the electric car. So who invented the first electric vehicle? We're not really sure, but this Hungarian guy in 1828, his name was Ányos Jedlik, I think. He invented a small scale version of the electric motor on a model car. So, like, you could say it's him because he kind of had the idea, but it was a model car. So, like, fucking, it's like when you do the balloons to pick up like a toy car. It's like, okay, it's like, that's kind of cool, but it's not what you think it is. And then Robert Anderson is known as inventing the first true electric carriage in Scotland around 1832-39. I'm Scottish, fun fact. Not like in an interesting way, just like if you go back a couple of generations. It was designed more like a carriage than a car due to the evolution from the horse and wagon. So it looked more like, we'd be like, that looks like it should have a horse. But you got to think about the way they're viewing it at the time. You know, they haven't seen anything any different. And then in 1835, another small-scale electric car was built by Professor Stroutenhout in Holland and it was designed by him. It was built by his assistant, Christopher. I see the motherfucking professors in Holland don't want to get their hands dirty. What is it, Professor Strong King? You don't want to get your hands dirty and build the small scale electric car? No, I'm a designer. That is like, you know what pisses me off? When products say designed in America. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Stop trying to get the brand recognition of made in America without making it in America. And the whole made in America thing, that's a whole other tangent we could go into, but that just really bothers me. And this is what that feels like. Yes, it's on Apple. Apple's products say like designed in California. How many of the meetings about this were in California? I'd love to see a spreadsheet. Designed in America, and it's a fucking cup. No, literally. I saw that. It was on like a kitchen thing I bought the other day, like a spatula or something like that, like the little, you know what I'm talking about. And I was like, oh my God, designed in America. This has existed for like 50 years. Please relax. So in 1835, Thomas Davenport, a blacksmith from Brandon, Vermont, also built a small scale car. So what's crazy to me is that all over the world in the 1830s, everyone's building small scale electric cars. It's like, that is so like bonded of them. Like, I feel like normally women are usually like connected by invisible strings like that. But these like men of the 1830s, they're really just like connecting. You know what I mean? Like, they're like, you're across the Atlantic Ocean, but we're all building electric cars. Like, I feel like it's kind of cute of them. Do you get what I'm saying? And a more practical and successful electric road vehicle was invented by Thomas Davenport and Robert Davidson, like we said, in 1842. Both inventors were the first to use the newly invented non-rechargeable electric cells, batteries. So they were batteries, but you couldn't recharge them, which seems very, very wasteful. But I get, like, it was the 1840s. y'all did not even have running water, I don't think. You were working with what you were working with. Frenchman Gaston Plant invented a better storage battery in 1865, and better capacity batteries were needed to make these more practical. Because really, who gives a shit if the battery can't be recharged? You can only go like 10 minutes. It's like, okay, whatever. In the late 1800s, France and Great Britain were the first nations to support widespread development of electric vehicles. And in 1899, a Belgian-built electric racing car called La Jamas Content set a world record for 68 miles an hour. 68 miles an hour in 1899. That's pretty surprising, I would say. I just had no idea that they had electric cars in the 1800s. I just felt like, I know this is kind of off topic, but it's related, and I felt like y'all needed to know about it. So I don't know who these men are, but apparently this is what it looked like. So you see what I mean? How it's kind of carriage-esque, like it looks more like a carriage than a car. That would have been insane to see back then. If a woman had invented the electric car, they would have burned her as a witch. They would have. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong. So here are the various electric cars we discussed and some other ones. So you can see they're doing their thing. This one's in front of the White House. They're like, beepity bop, bitch, electric car in front of the White House. There's a reconstruction one. You get the picture. They look like carriages, but they're kind of cars. To be honest, 68 today, I'm like, fuck, this is fast. No, it really is. It really is quite quick. Oh no. Can he still get out? Can who still get out? What's happening? Imagine how jarring that would be to see. I know, right? How long after the invention of cars did licenses become a thing? Oh, that's a good question. I have no idea. So America's late to the party. Shocker! 1830s, everyone's doing their electric car thing. It was not until 1895 that Americans began to devote attention to electric vehicles after an electric tricycle was built by William Morrison, or electric tricycle was built by A.L. Riker, and William Morrison built a 6-passenger wagon in 1891. I want to see the Real Housewives on the 6-passenger wagon, personally. I have a picture of the wagon. Oh, no, I don't. Actually, I think that's it. Yeah. Anyway, you know how the housewives are always fighting in a Sprinter van? I want to see them on William Morris's 1891 electric 6-passenger wagon. Please and thank you. Many innovations followed, and interest in motor vehicles increased greatly in the late 1890s and early 1900s. William Morrison's design had the first real and practical EV. It went up to 14 miles an hour. So like 14 miles an hour is a lot faster than walking, which was really your other option at this time. And in 1897, the first commercial EV application was established, and a fleet of New York City taxis built by the Electric Carriage and Wagon Company of Philadelphia. So they had all the taxis in New York City were electric carriages in literally 1897. Like, why do we never learn this? These are the electric carriages. This is not the 6-passenger one. I could have sworn I had a picture of the 6-passenger one. Maybe not though. So this is that's the cab of New York. Beep bop, bitch. Here's another one of the early inventions. I know they're exploring electric vehicles, but do you think they ever explored each other's bodies? One may wonder. And at the turn of the century, America was prosperous and cars were available in steam, electric, and gas, and were starting to become more popular. This is in the game. In the years 1899 and 1900 were the high point of electric cars in America, and they outsold all other type of cars. So electric cars were like the OG car of America. One example was the 1902 Phaeton, built by Woods Motor and Vehicle Company of Chicago. It had a range of 18 miles, a top speed of 14 miles an hour, and cost $2,000. How much is that in today's money? Let me do it really quick. For everything else on here, I did it, but I guess I didn't notice this one. Inflation calculator. How much was it? 2,000 in 1906, I think. Was that right? 1916, so close. Not really. Not for the people living it. That is $56,000 today. So like that is expensive, but cars right now are expensive as fuck. So I guess that really checks out. So anyway, for in today's money, what was about $56,000, he later went on to invent a hybrid car that had an internal combustion engine and an electric motor. And electric vehicles had a lot of advantages over their competition. They did not vibrate because the motor was different. They didn't have the smell and noise associated with gasoline-powered cars. So changing gears on gasoline cars was the most difficult part, and electric vehicles did not require gear changes. Again, I don't know how cars work. I just know that when I press the gas on mine, it goes. So I don't know why any of this is the case. And steam-powered cars also had no gear shifting. I want to learn more about this steam-powered cars. What happened with that? That seems maybe dangerous, though. Anyway. Steam-powered cars had no gear shifting, but it would take them up to 45 minutes to start on a cold morning, and they had less range before they needed water compared to an electric car's range, which was on a single charge. So the only good roads of the period were in town, which meant most commutes were local, which was the perfect situation for electric vehicles because they had a very limited range. So you might be saying, like, wait, if you can only go like 15 miles, or 18 miles is the only range, where the fuck are you going? There weren't really roads. So you weren't going to go that far to begin with. So with basic electric cars costing under $1,000, which $1,000 in 1910 was $32,000 today, they had fancy cars for $3,000, which would be $97,000 today. And electric vehicles enjoyed success into the 1920s. Their production peaked in 1912, but the years that they were like the number one car compared to other cars was 1899 and 1900. Wanted to clarify because that's what's in the game. So yeah, we were really like in our electric car era. But by the 1920s, when roads started to get better, people wanted longer range of vehicles. And then they found oil in Texas. Sorry to anyone in Texas. I'm sure that you're very, very nice, but why did you have to do that? Also, for those of you on TikTok that are saying you want to read along with me, you have to come to Twitch where I'm sharing my screen and you can see all the things. So the price of gasoline plummeted because they found oil in Texas, and so gas cars became a lot cheaper to maintain. And the inventions of the electric starter in 1912 eliminated the need for the hand crank. So really electric cars, like they started as really advanced, but they kind of didn't improve. And gas cars were just like in their moment and really, really, really improving. The initiation of mass production of or internal combustion engines by Henry Ford also made the vehicles much more affordable, which we will talk about. So just to give you some numbers here, in 1912, an electric car was $1,750, about 55 grand today, but a gas car was $650, about 20 grand today. So the gas cars just became a ton cheaper. So electric vehicles really disappeared by 1935 just because the gas cars became so much cheaper. Bravo Addict, thanks for following. Bravo Addict, you're here on a history day. Welcome to the party. So electric cars had their moment. I really wanted to take that detour because I just felt like it was interesting and ooh, yay. I really wanted to take that detour because I thought it was interesting, even though it's technically not about car infrastructure. So that's the story of kind of how we got cars to begin with. How else did people get around? Because what we're seeing is really the wealthier people had cars, and they really were not that popular. So people got around with roads, canals, and railways. We really used to be like a canal country. We used to look at like the Northeast, like your Indiana, your Ohio, your Pennsylvania. We really used to just be like, fuck it, let's build a canal. You know what would look great right here? A river. I would love an artificial river to send my ships and canoes through, if you will. They also started to use railroads, but railroads were more about transporting stuff rather than people. And you're not going to have a railroad like that drives up to your house. So you can see the red is the railroads. They go pretty like far and wide, but that's more of like a interstate thing than like a local thing. Trains. So this is how people got around in the cities. These little trains, these little streetcars. Originally, they were carried by horses. Horses. So this is a trolley line. This one is from 1900. And then here is another one. This is when they started moving to those more electric engines, I believe. They had engines in them. I'm not 100% sure how these work. I told you this was a history thing, not a mechanics thing. So once they moved on from the horses, they started putting engines in them. And these were very popular in the cities around this time before cars were very, very common because, like we said, cars were expensive. So in the later half of the 19th century, transit systems were horse-drawn streetcars, and then, yes, I was right, electric-powered and cable cars that were streetcars. Rail was more comfortable and had less rolling resistance than street traffic on granite block, and horse-drawn streetcars were generally a step up from the horse bus. I don't know what the fuck the horse bus is, but that does not sound like something I want to be a part of. Electric traction was faster, more sanitary, cheaper to run, and then they don't have to deal with all of the horses. Obviously, you know, horses be pooping, they can get hurt. It's just like not a great situation. So these electric ones started overtaking the horse ones, and streetcars paid ordinary business and property taxes, but also generally paid franchise fees, and they maintained at least the shared right of way. So the streetcar was like, you moved for the streetcar. You get what I'm saying? Like if you had a car, the streetcar is the boss of the fucking road. They also provided street sweeping and snow clearance. They were also required to maintain service levels. Many franchise fees were fixed or based upon certain like gross versus net arrangements, and they had fixed fares. This eventually created financial pressure because we'll talk about this more later, but a lot of them, they had like rules that they could only charge people 5 cents. So like they really, when like cost went up and things, like they couldn't handle it from a business perspective because of the way a lot of these companies were set up. Many electric lines, especially in the West, were tied into other real estate or transportation enterprises. The Pacific Electric and Los Angeles Railways especially were loss leaders for property development and long-haul shipping. So some of the electric lines, the trolleys, they were actively losing money by running it, but they were doing it because they were going to make money on the land, or they were doing it because that system fed into their long haul system. So it's kind of like when they give away free tampons at department stores, like they're losing the money, but they get more customers because they have that available. So like you could get more customers on your long haul thing because you have the local thing, if that makes sense. So America's streetcar public transport era. So like you can see, some of the streetcar companies, they were making money. Some of them were struggling financially. Some of them were just investments into land and being able to use it for other businesses. But regardless, they were extremely popular. And mass transit had really been a part of our urban scene since the early 1800s, because like we saw with the horse ones is how it started. Regular steam ferry service also began during this time. And the expanding network of the horse railways and then the electric railways became widespread pretty much everywhere. And at the World Cotton Centennial in New Orleans, which was in 1844, which the World Cotton Centennial is like 6 months. I guess travel time was a long way back then. So if you were going to go somewhere, you stay. But I just noticed that's from December 1884 to June 1885. Bye, honey. I have a business trip. Be back in a year. I guess that's really how it was back in the day. Damn. It featured displays of electric light illumination, electric elevators, and electric streetcars. So it's like it's a work conference, literally. What happened to rich people funding public service to get clout? That's what I'm saying. That's what I am saying. So anyway, Montgomery, Alabama established its electric streetcar system, nicknamed the Lightning Route, in 1886. Another early system was in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We love The Office, giving it the nickname the Electric City. And then there was also an electric streetcar line between Omaha and South Omaha in Nebraska. And then the Omaha Motor Railway Company opened in 1888. Like, who fucking knew that Omaha, Nebraska was on the forefront of public transportation? And then along the East Coast, very popular as well, Richmond, Virginia, Washington, D.C., lots of different things. And the North American English term of trolley instead of tram derives from the work that they did in Richmond and quickly spread elsewhere. Los Angeles actually had one of the biggest tramway systems in the world. It was originally horse-drawn in 1872 and then later turned into electric, but they were horse for a while. But keep in mind, it's like the Wild West, quote unquote, which I hate that phrase because of reasons. Google it. But they eventually did get electricity out there. It just took longer than on the East Coast because you had to like obviously build the electric infrastructure like cross coast, which took us a little minute as a country. Also in Maryland, they had the streetcar system, and they built a streetcar system to take people to an amusement park to entice more people to ride the streetcars. Like, what happened to passion for trains that they built an amusement park to get people to ride the trains? Like, why isn't that happening anymore? Like, why do we park at the amusement park? Why can't the amusement park be like in the city and you take a train there? That seems better. No, some other cities have streetcars, but San Francisco is the only one where it's like very widespread, I think. And then we also have a couple other ones in Connecticut. And in days before radio listening was popular in towns and neighborhoods that were too small to support a viable amusement park, streetcar lines might help them fund an appearance of a touring musical act to boost weekend afternoon ridership. So the streetcar companies are really investing into expansion. Like, they're paying fucking musical acts to get people to try the trains. And then these are just some pics from this era. So these are some of those more horse-drawn ones. Look at this. Look at this. Madison and 4th Ave to Post Office. There's another horse one. Like you can see, it was a mix of electric and horses, kind of depending on the city. Look at that. Look at these trains. Look at this. Look at the trains. Are you looking at the trains? It's like the monorail. And then 99th Street. I don't know which city this is in. It says Broadway, but there's lots of Broadways. Oh, it's New York. It says it on the bottom. And look at all these people. Look at this efficient mode of transportation. We already looked at that, and it's horses. Here is a map of Brooklyn. This is the Brooklyn streetcar system in 1830. Do we have any New Yorkers in the chat? Can we attest? Is this better than the subway system? From my perspective, I have been on the New York subway a couple of times. I think that this seems a lot more detailed. Like, I remember being in Brooklyn and being like, wow, that subway station's very far from where we are. And that just seems like you're never too far from a spot. And also with the streetcars, they move pretty slow, so you don't have to make stops per se. Like they do stop, but you can pick it up anywhere on the line. You get what I'm saying? It's not like the subway that's underground where you have to like go down into one of the stops. This, you can like see it and go. You can't get from Queens to Brooklyn without the G, which sucks, or you have to go into Manhattan. Ugh. There's like no place to find the subway in Brooklyn. Fuck the New York subway. So glad that y'all are here to attest to this. It's better than the subway system. It's better than the subway in that the trolley system isn't completely fucked when the water levels start to rise due to climate change. Exactly. Billionaires complain about the economy and then actively refuse to help it. Here is a map in Los Angeles. So this is in 1906. And keep in mind, California was literally like created not long before this. So that's impressive that they have this expansive of a streetcar system in LA. This is someone that drew it onto Google Maps in LA. So if anyone here, this is one thing I like about this topic because I get to like talk to you all a lot. If anyone here has any familiarity with the LA geography, I really don't at all. This seems pretty good. Like when I'm looking at least what was LA at this time when they built it. Obviously, like all of these outer places were not as developed back then, but this seems more expansive. I know people really complain about the public transportation in LA. Here is St. Louis. St. Louis is really popping off. Like, look at that grid. Look at that grid structure. What can't she do? This is Buffalo. I really like the Buffalo, like how it kind of fans out and then into the center of the city. And then you can see it zooms into the center of the city. It gets a lot more detailed in that part that I'm assuming is a lot more populated. This is Atlanta. Atlanta is shocking to me. I actually am very familiar because I grew up in Atlanta. So this is downtown Atlanta, and then this is Emory University. These right now driving, depending on traffic, I would say good 30 minutes. So the fact that there's streetcars all the way out there and like look at all of the lines that go out very, very, very far. St. Louis misredacted watch party meetup when. And then here's another map of Atlanta. Atlanta had a lot of the best maps that I saw. But yeah, I thought this was crazy, crazy impressive that they had all of these streetcars that went all the way out into like what is today really the suburbs. So side note, part of the reason that streetcars started to decline was because of violent strikes, but I did want to give the context because I know when you hear violent strikes, you're like, what the hell? I did want to give the context that this was also like the height of the labor movement at this time. And there were violent strikes in a lot of industries. And a lot of time the violence was on like the people doing the violence were the police and the US government. Like they would actively like kill people and try and like force them to go back to work to break their strikes and things like that. So a lot of the strikes did become very violent that were in this industry, but that is not unique of this time and it's not unique of this industry at all. There were other violent train strikes, but it's mainly because with trains, the government kept the president, the president, governors, people like that kept calling in the military and like the state militia and things like that because they were like, this is disrupting commerce. So like, that's why it always escalates with trains. The same thing has happened with like the steel industry. And the oil industry as well is like very intense. So I just wanted to give context that when we are talking about these violent strikes, that is very like typical of this time, and these people going through this violence and like putting their life on the line is why today we have minimum wage laws, why we have anti-child labor laws that are slowly being stripped away. This is why we have workers' comp if you get hurt at work, because of what these workers did and how they like fought for these things and fought to have collective bargaining and rights against their employers. So it's not unique to this industry is what I just was trying to explain. So between 1895 and 1929, almost every major city in the U.S. suffered at least one streetcar strike. Sometimes they would be a few days, sometimes they would be longer, and they were marked almost continuously and often spectacular violent conflict, amounting to prolonged riots and civil insurrection. Pour one out for the ones who passed from the violent strikes. Exactly. And if I do have a YouTube video about this, I have an older YouTube video about the labor movement if you would like to learn more about that. So Streetcar strikes rank among the deadliest of armed conflicts in American labor union history. Samuel Gompers of the American Federation of Labor called the St. Louis streetcar strike of 1900 the fiercest struggle ever waged by organized toilers. And up to that point, there were 14 people dead and 200 injured. The San Francisco streetcar strike of 1907 saw 300 people killed and 1,000 people injured, and many of the casualties were passengers and innocent bystanders. In 1929, the New Orleans streetcar strike was one of the last of its kind. The rise of private automobile ownership started to take the edge off, as an article noted in 1915. So as cars became more popular, like we talked about when they were being invented, the strikes kind of became less powerful. And this is really, it really is St. Louis's night. Wow. This is really like me putting my conspiracy hat on, not even my conspiracy hat, but just like, it's so interesting how capitalism works. And I think that capitalism, like so many things, can be so insidious. And like, I think it's interesting that when we have public transportation, it shows how powerful we are as a working class because it inherently makes us very unified. A streetcar strike is so effective because the working class relied on streetcars to get to work. So like that is very disruptive to the ruling class. And that's the whole point of strikes, is to be disruptive to the ruling class. So I'm not saying it was like they were like, let's get rid of the public transportation and then they won't be unified. I don't think they were that smart, but I think it's interesting that the most powerful strikes that ended up being the most violent strikes were having to do with public transportation. And I think that public transportation is so integral to like working class solidarity and unity, because like it's community in a way, and we're running it. Like working class people are running the public transportation. So like if your society's reliant on transportation, so if workers can come together and stop transportation, that becomes a very, 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 very powerful thing. Highways in suburbia were actually designed to create racism and combat communism. We will discuss. We are early in the night. And so like we said, streetcar lines started to decline around this time, and then especially during the Great Depression. So it was the Great Depression and also something else very insidious. Let's get into the General Motors streetcar conspiracy. Bear with me. This is a lot of slides. God loves you. Please repent of you sins before it's too late. Are the sins in the room with us? I'm living in sin, but he's in the other room, so it doesn't count. So the General Motors Company, GM, you are probably familiar, is headquartered in Detroit, Michigan. They are known for owning Chevrolet, GMC, Cadillac, and Buick. They were founded in 1908. Just if you don't know what GM is. So I'm going to give you the TLDR of what we're going to talk about before we actually get into the details of it, because this is dense. I hope y'all are here for a dense night, because this is nurse, he's out again. This is sticky. This is dense. This is a lot. And I think you're going to be very into it, because it's like, it says conspiracy, but I think it's just facts, if we're being honest. So this is the TLDR of it all. Oh, too long, didn't read. It's like a shortened version of something. So the General Motors streetcar conspiracy refers to the convictions of GM and related companies that were involved in monopolizing the sale of buses and supplies to national city lines, as well as allegations that they conspired to own or control transit systems, which is in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. So basically what that's saying, GM, General Motors, and other companies were convicted of the fact that they were trying to monopolize public transportation under one company. Monopolize is when one company controls the whole thing. It's really bad for one company to control it, because if they raise prices, we're fucked, and we have no competition. So they can treat us like shit and have really expensive prices, and there's nothing we can do about it. That's why monopolies are not good for consumers. Wait, it's all lobbying? Always has been. So, this lawsuit created lingering suspicions that the auto companies plotted to dismantle the streetcar system in an attempt to push cars and surface transportation, which is like buses and cars. So, let's get into the details of it now that you know what this means. So, 1917, John D. Hertz establishes the Chicago Motor Coach Company. This marks his entry into the transportation industry. They began offering bus services within Chicago, catering to the growing demand for motorized public transportation. So, like we had already talked about, streetcars at this point, a lot of people were already getting cars. So, it's not like streetcars were the only option at this point. It's 1917. We definitely have cars on the road. 1923, recognizing the potential for manufacturing buses, John Hertz founded the Yellow Coach Manufacturing Company. This was to focus on producing buses. So he is a bus manufacturer. They were known for their reliability and efficiency. And then in 1926, building on his expertise in operating and manufacturing buses, he creates the Omnibus Corporation. They had ambitious plans, including expanding motor coach operations to urban and rural communities. They wanted to create nationwide coverage for buses. And as a part of this expansion, they acquired Fifth Avenue Coach Company in New York City, further solidifying their presence in major metropolitan areas. Now, Fifth Avenue Coach Company is under Omnibus. They take a strategic move by buying out a majority stake in the Railway Corporation. So just to like get you back up to speed, this guy makes this bus company very successful. The bus company ends up buying some other companies and then purchasing the New York rail system. So a bus company is buying the rail system. So this acquisition basically means the bus and rail systems are under the exact same company. Truly an omnibus, truly. So now they own all of the railroads of New York, which is great. Not all of, but a significant part of the public transport ones. And in 1926, GM recognizes the significance of the bus manufacturing industry. So now it's 1926, cars are getting more and more popular, and General Motors is like, what's Yellow Coach Manufacturing? I like what y'all are doing. You have a lot going on. So General Motors buys Yellow Coach Manufacturing. If you recall, Yellow Coach Manufacturing is a part of Omnibus. Omnibus bought the trains in New York. So that's why this is considered a conspiracy, because it's not like GM bought the trains in New York. You know what I'm saying? But to me, it's like, Mom, can you pick me up? They're monopolizing and I'm scared. So they argued that Hertz buses were not in direct competition with streetcars. They were like, no. The bus is a higher priced motor coach. That is not a streetcar. Someone lied to you several times and you look very stupid. They really just gaslit everyone into thinking that these two companies were not in competition with each other. So it was fair for the same guy to own them. And he could like work for GM and all, like everything was hunky dory, because they were like, his buses are very expensive. So this essentially means the man who started the bus company and now specializes in fancy motor coaches is on the board of directors for a company that's dictating the ins and outs of the transportation system. Not only did he buy the New York rail system, he's also on the board of General Motors in the 1920s. And by 1930, most streetcar systems were aging and were losing money. That's why they were able to buy the one in New York, because it was losing money and was not really profitable. So Yellow Coach, the bus company, the original bus company that turned into Omnibus, tried to persuade transit companies to replace streetcars with buses, but could not persuade power companies that owned streetcar operations to motorize, because the power companies were like, girl, I don't give a fuck. Like, I'm not dealing with this. So GM decided to form a new subsidiary, United Cities Motor Transport, to finance the conversion of streetcar systems to buses in small cities. So literally General Motors is the one that is paying all of these streetcar systems to transform from train systems to bus system. The new subsidiary made the investments in small transit systems in Kalamazoo, in Saginaw, Springfield, so Ohio and Michigan. They successfully, big quotes on that one, got rid of the streetcar systems and implemented bus systems. Why is a car company in charge of public transportation? I am begging for answers. I am begging for answers about why this was allowed and who was ignoring this. Then the United Cities Motor Transport approached Portland, Oregon, and they were censured by the American Transit Association and dissolved in 1935. So this was short-lived, but they did destroy. Patrick was here. Thanks for subscribing. They did destroy the streetcar system in multiple small cities in the 10 years that they were alive, which is insane. So the New York Railways Corporation began to convert to buses as well in 1935. Shocker. You mean when you let the bus company owner buy the railway, he put a bus there? Who would have thought? Omnibus put buses on the railroads. Wow. Oh, great point that this was all men. I meant to say this earlier and I got distracted. Part of the reason I like more modern history is because this is when they started letting some women go to school. So we have a little bit more perspective about some events. Same thing with authors of color. I'm really not interested in reading from a time where y'all were just writing down lies. I'm really, okay, you want me to read your little lies and memorize them? Goodbye. Shoo. Goodbye. So during this period, GM, General Motors, worked with the Public Service Transportation in New Jersey to develop an all-service vehicle, a bus that was also capable of working as a trackless trolley, allowing off-wire passenger collection in areas too lightly populated to pay for wire infrastructure. So they're pushing these buses, y'all. They are pushing the buses. And the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935 made it illegal for single private businesses to provide both public transport and supply electricity to other parties. This forced electricity generator companies to divest from the trolley. So the companies that had been investing in this were electric companies because you're going to make money. It's an electric streetcar. So now those companies are legally forbidden from investing in those companies, and they have to cross-subsidize, which is just whatever, man. Basically, they can't invest anymore. So now the trolley system has no fucking investors. And this was about the Sherman Antitrust Act, but I move on. So then in 1936, things get worse. National City Lines, which had been started as a minor bus operation in 1920 by this guy, Roy Fitzgerald, and his brother, they decided to reorganize this, quote, for the purpose of taking over the controlling interest in certain operating companies engaged in city bus transportation and overland bus transportation. And they got loans from suppliers and manufacturers. And then in 1939, Roy Fitzgerald, president of the NCL, approached Yellow Coach Manufacturing again, requesting additional financing for expansion. And in the 1940s, they raised funds to expand from Firestone Tire, Federal Engineering, a subsidiary of the Standard Oil Company of California, which is now Chevron, Phillips Petroleum, which is now part of ConocoPhillips, GM, and Mack Trucks, now a subsidiary of Volvo. So basically, this bus company is raising money to expand from the auto industry and the oil industry. Yay! I love our country! This is so stupid. Why did we let this happen? Literally, they're like, we moved the bus. We're going to use the bus instead. And like we said, and we'll talk more about the streetcars finance stuff later, but the streetcars did have problems. But I don't see how a bus is better. And then Pacific City Lines formed as a subsidiary of NCL. NCL was the one raising all the money. And they purchased streetcar systems in Western United States. And then those two companies merged together. So one company that's a bus company that's raising all this money from all of these companies that are going to benefit the oil, the gas, the auto, all those people, they're now just buying all of the streetcar companies. And remember, the streetcar companies have no ways of getting investors, so they really cannot avoid a buyout. What prompted the law for the electric companies to stop investing? That's what I'm a little bit unsure about that. I'm guessing it was the middle of the Great Depression, so maybe they wanted the electric companies to invest into other things. But yeah, it also could have been, like we said, like a labor situation. You can gun the engine on the bus and it goes, I can't gun the engine on a streetcar. So American City Lines, ACL, which had been organized to acquire local transportation system in larger metropolitan areas, was also merged with NCL. So this company is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the federal government did investigate some aspects of NCL's financial arrangement in 1941. And by 1947, NCL owned or controlled 46 systems in 45 cities in 16 states. 45 cities is a lot. 45 cities, especially during that time, is really a lot. And from 1939 to 1940, sorry, I have allergies right now, NCL or PCL, the National City, Pacific City, it's all the same company. They're all under the same umbrella. Attempted to do a hostile takeover of the Key system. The Key system was electric trains and streetcars in Oakland, California, and this attempt was temporarily blocked by a syndicate of the Key system insiders with a controlling interest secured in 1941, but then by 1946, PCL acquired 64% of their stock anyway. So they tried to do a hostile takeover and then they failed, but then they were successful anyway. But according to Wikipedia, we don't really have a good citation for that. So just take that with a grain of salt, I guess. So beginning in the 1940s, NCL and PCL slowly took control of LA's streetcar systems, the red cars and the yellow cars. And then in 1940, they also took over the Pacific Electric's operations in Glendale, Burbank, and Pasadena. And lines from San Bernardino were phased out literally a year later. And the Hollywood subway, which ran lines from Burbank, Glendale, and San Bernardino Valley, closed in 1955. So pretty much immediately. I imagine the war took the government's eye off of this to an extent. Yes, that is very much true. And pretty much immediately as they're acquiring these smaller like rail companies, they're pretty much just immediately shutting them down, like within 10, 15 years. And then in 1945, they acquired Los Angeles Railways at a price of $13 million and announced they would scrap all but 3 of the yellow car lines. And then in 1953, the remainder of their electric network was sold to Metropolitan City Lines, which was a subsidiary of this same company we've been talking about. So everything is awful, which is great. And in 1953, the remainder of Pacific Electric's network, I already said that, just kidding. So PCL owns fucking everything. Everything's being converted to buses. And the remaining assets of the original Pacific Electric system and the LA system were sold by Metropolitan City Lines and LA Transit to the new Los Angeles Metropolitan Transit Authority. So they literally just like shut it down and sold it all off. Bye-bye. Deuces. And under the new public authority, the final remaining streetcars were phased out, and the final red car made its last service in 1961, and the final yellow car in 1963. So that gorgeous system of public transport that was electric in Los Angeles is completely phased out by 1963. So let's talk about Edwin Quinby. Edmund Quinby was a reserve commander and the founder of the Electric Railroaders Association in 1934, which lobbied on behalf of rail users and services, and a former employee of the New Jersey Rapid Transit System, which operated into New York State. He published a 24-page expose on how the owners of National City Lines, and he addressed it to the mayors, the city manager, and the city transit engineer, the members of the Committee on Mass Transportation nation, the taxpayers, and the riding citizens of your community. So this motherfucker said, everybody listen, I have something to say. And it began, this is an urgent warning to each and every one of you that there is careful, deliberately planned campaign to swindle you out of your most important and valuable public utilities, your electric railway system. And his activism may have led the authorities to prosecute GM and other companies for this. He also questioned who was behind the creation of the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935, which had caused such difficulty for streetcar operation. Like we said earlier, we were like, why the fuck did this law get passed? And he was later to write a history of the North Jersey Rapid Transit. I would love to invite this man to a dinner party. Like when people are like, oh, alive or dead, who could you invite to a dinner party? Edwin Quinby. Let me hear what you have to say. Because clearly they were not listening to you at the time. So they did kind of low-key get in trouble for this. April 9th, 1947, 9 corporations and 7 individuals were indicted in the Federal District Court of Southern California on counts of conspiring to acquire control of a number of transit companies, forming a transportation monopoly, and conspiring to monopolize the sale of buses and supplies to companies owned by National City Lines. I wish our government still did stuff like this. And in 1948, they changed the venue from Southern California to Northern Illinois following the appeal, which felt that there was evidence of conspiracy to monopolize the supply of buses and supplies. So they fucking changed locations. I don't understand how the legal system works. And then in 1949, Firestone Tire, Standard Oil of California, which is now Chevron, Phillips Petroleum, GM, and Mack Trucks were all convicted of conspiring to monopolize the sale of buses and related products to the local transit companies controlled by NCL, but they were acquitted of conspiring to monopolize the ownership of these companies. So they literally convicted them and then were like, mwah, we forgive you. So they didn't get them on the monopolization of ownership, but they did get them on conspiring to monopolize, which I don't really understand how that's different. But again, I'm not a lawyer. The verdicts were upheld in an appeal in 1951. GM, so yeah, it says they convicted them of conspiring to monopolize the sale of buses and related products, but they were not convicted of conspiring to monopolize ownership of the company. I guess they could convict them of the monopolizing buses because they were like, you own all the buses, but the ownership, they didn't have like receipts probably. So the verdicts were upheld in 1951. GM was fined $5,000, which in today's money is only $56,000. They destroyed the transit system in over 50 cities, and they only got fined $56,000. I make more than that in a year. And I'm a teacher. Like, are you kidding me? Like, and the GM treasurer was fined $1. $1. Una. 1. The trial judge said, I am very frank to admit that counsel that after a very exhaustive review of the entire transcript of the case and of the exhibits that were offered and received in evidence, that I might not have come to the same conclusion as the jury came to were I trying this case without a jury, explicitly noting that he might not have himself convicted in a bench trial. So the judge really even wasn't going to convict them. What is this fucking legal system? God. And then in 1948, San Diego Electric Rail Company was sold to Western Transit Company for $5.5 million. And the guy that it was owned by, J.L. Howe, was also president of the Key System, which later was involved with Metropolitan Coach Line's purchase of passenger operations, like we said, this company. And then the last San Diego streetcars were converted to buses by 1949, and he ended up selling the bus-based system back to the city in 1966. So they literally, there's more than one case of them like getting rid of the streetcars, turning it into buses, and then being like, your problem now, goodbye. And they only got fined $1. And the other one was $56,000 to the company and $1 to the treasurer. And then the Baltimore streetcar system was operated by the Baltimore Transit Company until it was purchased by NCL in 1948 and started converting to buses, and the Baltimore ridership plummeted by double digits each of the following years, and the Pacific Railway's struggling passenger operations were purchased by MCL in 1953 and were taken into public ownership in 1958, where they again took the last routes into bus operation. The standards and rules for individual people are higher than multi-million corporations, and that's America. Knowing this and then thinking about the auto bailout 10 years ago kills me. So, Urban Mass Transportation Act and the 1957 antitrust hearings. The Urban Mass Transportation Act of 64 created an administration with a remit to conserve and enhance values in existing urban areas, noting that our national welfare therefore requires a provision of good urban transportation with the properly balanced use of private vehicles with modern mass transportation to help shape as well as serve urban growth. That sounds like it was written by ChatGPT, but it literally is their actual purpose. So, funding for transit was increased in 1970 and then further extended in 74 to pay for the construction cost. And in 1970, Harvard law student Robert Hicks began working on the Ralph Nader Study Group for Land Use in California, alleging another wider conspiracy to dismantle streetcar systems, and he published this. But again, Wiki says full citation needed, so take it with a grain of salt. So, 1972, Senator Philip Hart introduces the Industrial Reorganization Act with the intention to restructure the U.S. economy, to restore competition, and address antitrust concerns. And during a 1973, Bradford Snell, an attorney with Pillsbury, Madison, and Sutro, blah, 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 wrote a paper titled American Ground Transport, a proposal for restructuring the automobile, truck, bus, and rail industries. And this paper was funded by the Stern Fund and was described as a masterpiece. In it, Snell said that General Motors was a sovereign economic state. Pre-K pause. General Motors is a sovereign economic state? Literally, what are you talking about? So this is at like the congressional hearings, I'm assuming, where they're literally pulling up this paper where he's like, GM is great, let her do whatever she wants. And they said that the company played a major role in the displacement of rail and bus transportation companies, or rail and bus transportation by buses and trucks. This paper was distributed in a Senate binding together with the accompanying statement implying that the contents were considered the views of the Senate. So this one paper is like suddenly, apparently, officially the views of the government. The chair of committee later apologized for the error, but adding to the confusion, the guy that wrote it had already joined the Senate Judiciary Committee on Antitrust and Monopolies as a staff member. This is actually pissing me off. I thought it would. And at the hearings in April 1974, San Francisco mayor and antitrust attorney Joseph Alioto, I think is right, testified that General Motors and the automobile industry generally exhibit a kind of monopoly evil, adding that GM has carried out a deliberate and concerted effort with the oil companies and tire companies for the purpose of destroying a vital form of competition, namely electric rapid transit. And Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley also testified, saying that GM, through its subsidiaries, PCL, because remember, GM funded PCL, scrapped the Pacific Electric and Los Angeles streetcar systems, leaving the electric train system totally destroyed. Neither the mayor nor Snell himself pointed out that the two cities were major parties to that lawsuit against GM, which Snell himself had been instrumental in bringing, and all had a direct or indirect financial interest. That lawsuit was eventually dropped. So there was some like weirdness with the people testifying, just for like full clarity about a lawsuit. I don't really know the details of it. I looked, but I couldn't really find. But George Hilton, a professor of economics at UCLA and a transit scholar, rejected Snell's views, saying that I would argue that Snell's interpretations are not correct, furthering that they couldn't be possibly correct because of major conversions of society of this character from rail to freewheel urban transportation, from steam to diesel railroad propulsion. I'm like too stupid to talk to UCLA professors, are the sort of conversations that would only come about as a result of public preference, technological change, and relative abundance of natural resources and other personal phenomenon or influence, and rather the machinist of a monopolist. So people disagree, just to give you the full thing. And GM published a rebuttal titled The Truth About American Ground Transport, and the Senate subcommittee printed GM's work in tandem with Snell's as an appendix to their hearings. So GM explicitly did not address the specific allegations that they were subjected to. So I think that they did it, and this Snell guy was writing about it. But no one took your boy serious. So, role in the declining of the streetcars. Quinby and I'm getting tongue twisted. This is a long stream. Quinby and Snell held that the destruction of the streetcar was integral to a larger strategy to push the United States into automobile dependency. So, like he said, where he said GM was acting as, what did he say? GM was acting as a sovereign economic state. I think at first I thought he meant that seriously, but now I realize he meant it derogatorily. So we do agree with Snell. I did him dirty at the beginning, so I wanted to just clarify and fix that. But anyway, they held that this was integral to a larger strategy to push the United States into automobile dependency, and most transit scholars disagree with that, suggesting that the transit systems were brought about by other factors. So you and I are probably team it was a conspiracy, but apparently a lot of transit scholars disagree with us, but maybe GM is paying them too. Who's to say? Like we talked about, the unrealistic fares they had, the political factors like the labor movement and all of that stuff. So the fixed fares during inflation was the biggest thing. The Great Depression, antitrust actions, and the Public Utility Holding Company Act of 1935, like we talked about, labor unrest and other market forces, and also increased traffic congestion. This is in the game. I think it's somewhere in here. But once 10% of people had cars, it started creating problems for the streetcars, which is crazy to me. It was just 10% of drivers were able to fuck shit up. So anyway, where was I? So the accuracy of the significant elements of Snell's testimony were challenged in an article published in Transportation Quarterly in 1997, where they said that without GM, the streetcar would have not been driven to extinction by 1968. I'm going to skip through some of this because it's really just some people agreeing and some people disagreeing with it. So now that we have covered the General Motors streetcar conspiracy stuff, that was the Wikipedia page, just so you know. We really just read through most of Wikipedia, and I changed the order of some stuff to try and make it more clear. I told y'all that was dense, but I really felt like you needed to see every moving part of it to see how like insidious and gross it was. I thought about just giving you the short version, but I was like, no, they can handle it. Like they need to see how they had all these holding companies and how like nasty and gross this all was. So this is from a different article. This is from Vox. So some of this will be a little bit redundant, but I'm going to skip through some of it. So this is literally just the entire Vox article. Like we said, there were tons of streetcars. We had 17,000 miles of streetcar lines in this country in pretty much every city. Nowadays, only 5% of workers commute via public transportation, and they're mostly in New York, Boston, and Chicago. And only a handful of cities have extensive streetcar systems. So what happened to all of this? So there is the conspiracy like we all talked about, but a lot of people say that that is not true. You're such a good teacher. Like, yeah, we could handle that because you literally can. So like we said, by the time National City Lines was buying up these streetcar companies, they were already in bankruptcy, but part of the reason they were in bankruptcy is because of that law that we don't know where it came from. And surprisingly, the streetcars did not solely go bankrupt because people chose to take a driving car instead. The real reasons were far less exciting than you would think. Their mainly reasons were because they were creating traffic and city rules kept the fares artificially low. So the golden age of streetcars we kind of already talked about, and at that time it was very, 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 very profitable. And cities expanded and people found themselves living far, so they created the streetcars, and often the streetcar owners were very corrupt monopolies. Like it would be like one like cartoon villain that owned the streetcar company. So many of them contracted with city governments as the explicit right to operate as a monopoly in that city. So you know how like you have to buy power from a certain company, like maybe you get it from your government, but in a lot of places there's only one choice of the company. That's because they have like a contract with the city to be the supplier of it. And then when you get a contract with the city to be like the monopoly supplier, the city can control your prices, because it's like, if you're going to make all this money and be the only choice, like we're going to keep an eye on you kind of thing. So that happened with the streetcar companies. So eager to receive guarantees on their large upfront investments, they agreed to contract provisions that held fares constant at 5 cents and maintained that rail owners maintain the pavement around their tracks. So because they were being greedy and trying to get these monopolistic contracts, they ended up fucking their business in the long run, because they couldn't raise their prices and they had very high operating cost of having to take care of the tracks. And until World War I, this wasn't a big deal. But they started to become a big deal when like prices and inflation started to kick in, and then they couldn't raise their prices to keep up with the inflation, which became a problem. So this started to become an issue after World War I. Also because this is when cars became popular, like we talked about. As the Smithsonian exhibition puts it, Americans chose another alternative, the automobile. The car became the commuter option of choice for those who could afford it, and more people could do so. But the reality is more complicated than that, because of course it is. People weren't choosing to ride or not ride. They were making it in a messy real-world environment. And the real problem is that once cars appeared on the road, streetcars could no longer operate efficiently. This is the statistic I was talking about. Once 10% of people got cars, the streetcars would get off schedule, because the cars created traffic. Because when you have one person in each vehicle, that creates traffic. Sorry I'm late. The nurse was supposed to give a report and showed up an hour late. Hate that for you. Absolutely hate that for you. So literally, the streetcars themselves, no problem. We don't have traffic. We're all good. But once 1 in 10 people are driving a car, now it's so bad traffic. Terrible, terrible, terrible. In some places like Chicago, streetcars dedicated the right of way, then they survived in Chicago. In places where the cars got the right of way, they were doomed. With 160,000 cars cramming onto LA streets in the 1920s, mass transit riders complained of traffic jams and hour-long delays. And the streetcar contracts, like we said that they required them to keep the tracks in good shape. So the companies were effectively subsidizing automobile travel as automobile travel took over their business, because the trolley company is paying for the road that they're going on. So the cars are driving on it like for free, basically. And like we said, they were locked into the 5 cent fare, and people really people don't like it when you raise prices, and people viewed that 5 cent as like a birthright, and that they were going to be stuck in that forever. Nobody on these commissions would approve fare increases to cover cost, because that would get them in trouble with their constituents. So the politicians were worried about votes, so they didn't want to tell the streetcar companies they could raise prices. So the streetcar companies just all started going bankrupt. And the public did not have any sympathy for the streetcar companies, because they were corrupt monopolies to begin with. So today, many progressives and urbanists are boasters of the streetcar, but back then they often were very, very corrupt, especially because of the owner's history of violent strike breaking. Because when the guy that killed your husband because your husband wanted better working hours is oh, I need to raise prices, no one's going to feel bad for that guy. And this is how greed is literally so evil. I think greed is the most evil trait of all. So because of these factors, that's why the streetcar companies were starting to go into bankruptcy. And then that is when GM started to buy them up. So I don't think that these are competing views. I think both of these can be true. I think it is true that the streetcar companies were kind of set up without people thinking long term about business. And I think that GM realized that, saw an opportunity, and took advantage of it. I think if GM had not taken advantage of that, then the government might have been forced to deal with this and make this a more sustainable system, whatever that may have looked like. But the government didn't, because GM was like, oh, I bought it. It's a bus. We're good. Goodbye. Nothing to worry about. And like, also, it was the Great Depression. It was World War I. It was World War II. Like, we had a lot going on. So as companies fought to stay alive during the Great Depression, many companies invested in buses because they were cheaper and more flexible. Like a bus, you can drive it anywhere. Initially, they operated mainly as feeder systems to bring commuters to the end of lines, but then they ended up replacing it entirely, and that was not enough to save most of these companies. And by the 50s, planners put a priority on bringing cars into the cities with new urban highways, and that made streetcars truly impractical to get around on. And by the 1950s, virtually all of those streetcar companies were done, and then we already talked about this NCL stuff. So it's not exactly right to say people chose cars and that's why streetcars ended. There's kind of like a couple different factors at play here. So I really love Vox, and I want to say that. Just wanted to call that out because we're going to look at more Vox later. And Vox is just a great news source, in my opinion. They do good journalism. Not always perfect, but they're one of my favorites. So anyway, moving on to another important character in this story, Henry Ford. So some of this is from the Ford website, so just wanted to give you propaganda warning. It is a myth that he invented the automobile. That is not true. Like we talked about, he did not invent the automobile. He was the man that popularized the use of the assembly line. And this is when you put everything on a conveyor belt. If me and you, just the two of us, are building a car, that's going to take forever. One, because we have to know how to do everything. So I have to know how to make tires, how to make the engine. I have to know everything, and it's going to take me a long time, and it's going to be mad expensive because I know how to do everything, so you're going to pay me a lot. With an assembly line, we all have one job, and the car just moves on a conveyor belt, and we do our one job. So if my only job is to put the tires on, I'm really going to get good at that, and I'm going to be really fast, and we can make the car way faster, and you don't have to pay me as much because all I know how to do is tire. No thoughts, just tire. So that's how an assembly line works from a business perspective. So the most common feature was the conveyor belt, like we talked about, and moving the products from worker to worker was a better use of resources. So that is why they implemented it into the automobile manufacturing. He was just the first automobile manufacturer to do an assembly line. He didn't invent an assembly line. He just brought it to this industry. So they started using it at their plant, and Henry Ford famously remarked that the use of the assembly line allowed the work to be taken to the worker rather than the worker doing the work by moving around, and the vehicle would be pulled down, like we said, blah, blah, blah. So now it only took 90 minutes to build a car when before it would take like days or weeks. And in order to persuade workers to stay with the company, he included a $5 workday, which was like much better for the time. And the $5 workday involved profit sharing that would more than double the daily wage, raising it to $5. And it was widely believed that this would bankrupt the company. So basically, he had profit sharing that they would make more money when the company did well. He is a good businessman. These are all good business strategies, and everyone shaded him for them. And still to this day, people are like, that would be terrible, but it literally works. So anyway, people were like, you're going to go bankrupt. But the opposite happened. Mechanics from all over the country started running into Detroit because they were like, I heard you can be making that money in Detroit. And Henry Ford stated, we believe in making 25,000 men prosperous and contented rather than following the plan of making a few slave drivers in our establishment multimillionaires. So a lot of people blame Henry Ford for this. I blame GM. So he also made a shorter shift. He decreased the shift by 1 hour and paid them more. And the reason that this worked really well is because when he made the shift shorter, then he got a whole new shift of workers to work later. So instead of just having one long ass shift, having two medium shifts is actually a longer work day. and you make more money because they're working longer. You just have two sets of employees, but they're doing the same stuff. So this allowed Ford to create that third shift and hire a lot more workers, and they became a 24-hour operation. And Fordism also grew out of the moving assembly line, and this refers to large-scale production combined with high wages, and other industries started following that $5 day that was started by Ford Motor Company. Henry is what Elon thinks he is. Shout out to Henry Ford for 24-hour gas station. So Henry Ford is a girl's girl. He was a man of the 1930s. I will say that. It's almost like treating your workers decently creates a more profitable and efficient work environment. It's almost like when you invest in the people that are controlling every single motherfucking aspect of your business and those people are happy, it's good for the business. Isn't it funny how that works? So the Model T was $825, which in today's money was about $27,000. And then by 1925, it was only $260, which in today's money is $4,000. Imagine if you could get a brand new car for $4,000. Can you imagine? The biggest, most important part of this is that people that worked at Ford Motor could buy a Ford car. Henry Ford's big thing is he wanted his workers to be his customers. He wanted a car that working class people could buy. And he wanted to pay his workers enough that they could get a car and like live a better life. So again, I don't think that he was like, we have to prioritize public transport. But I did want to call out that like out of the auto industry villain, he seems like the most like aware socially of the time. And by the early 1920s, more than half of registered automobiles were Fords, and more than 15 million were bought and sold. So again, this is also when the streetcars were declining and the NCL thing was about to start. He was a fan of, the Nazis. Like I said, the Fordism business, exactly. He nailed it. But at the end of the day, this is a white man in the 1930s. And yeah, I did think Ford like sold cars to Nazis. I was pretty sure about that, but I didn't want to say it because I wasn't sure. But I feel like if both of us know that, it's probably true. So another stat, between 1900 and 1915, the number of cars in America jumped from just 8,000 to 2 million. Hitler had a portrait of Ford in his office? That is crazy. That's so niche. Why does Hitler have a portrait of Henry Ford in his office? That makes me uncomfortable. But here is the Model T. So again, now that everyone can buy this cheap-ass car, combined with all the other things we talked about, streetcar system's going, shwoop, she's done. So to wrap up what went on to kill the streetcars, he loved Ford's anti-Semitism. They were bestie vibes. So like we said, they weren't profitable and they could not raise prices and did not have good long-term planning. Womp womp. And then they started to have traffic because of the regular cars and then the whole national city lines and Henry Ford with the assembly line and Henry Ford being anti-Semitic and World War II happened. It's just a whole lot going on. A whole lot going on. Moving on to post-World War II. So where we are now, pretty much all the streetcars are gone or on their way out. World War II is over. I stole some of these slides from a different stream, just fair warning. You're not going crazy over the next like 5 or 6 slides. So in the 1950s, car culture started to be a very big thing with like the hot rod culture. You've seen like the 1950s cars, Grease, maybe if you're familiar. That's not the 50s, is it? I don't know. But anyway, 1 in 6 Americans in the 1950s were working in the auto industry. So it was not only big in like pop culture, it was big in people's day-to-day lives. And the US became the world's largest manufacturer of automobiles. And Henry Ford's goal from 30 years earlier that any man with a good job should be able to afford an automobile was achieved. Wish drive-in movies survived, the best part of the rise of car culture. And a new generation of service businesses was focused on customers with their automobiles. Drive-in movies, drive-in restaurants, all of those type of things. And the decade began with 25 million registered cars on the road, most of which were from before World War II and were in poor condition because no cars or parts were being produced during World War II. Like if you owned a car factory during World War II, it was like, you're making cars for the military now. We will buy them from you. Thanks. I'm actually talking about that in class soon. Like my class at work, not you all. But yeah, so the cars were a little bit of a mess. And by 1950, they were starting to make the transition back to consumer-based, and more than 8 million cars were produced alone in 1950. And by 1958, there were 67 million cars registered in the United States. So literally within just 8 years, we went from 25 million cars to 67 million cars. So these are some 1950s car pics. There's the interstate, the parking lot, the McDonald's, if you will, drive-in movies, more parking. This is actually like a more recent photo from a 1950s car show, but you can see the vibes of the cars. The restaurants, you get the vibes. 1950s car culture. Everyone's driving, everyone's parking. Racism's very much alive and well. This is, even though the font got messed up, this is just kind of an overview of the electric car stuff that we already talked about. So I'm going to skip that. And then, oh wait, did that have something new? So during the 1950s, there was a resurgence of electric cars. The National Electric Company created an electric car called the Henny Kilowatt that had a top speed of 60 miles an hour and could travel 50 miles on one charge. But they never really became popular because the gas cars were way, way, way cheaper. So we still technically do have electric cars, but just because the gas cars are cheaper, that's why they're still not popular. And then the Federal Highway Act of 1956 led to the construction of the interstate highway system. The interstate highway system is like when you're driving on the interstate, that's what that is. So like I-95 that goes up and down the East Coast, that's the highway. I-20 that goes across the Southeast, that's the highway. Like any of those major like letter and a number, that's usually the highway. So really at this time, like I feel like in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the U.S. had a choice to either reinvest into public transportation or to create a car and oil dependent economy. And we definitely went car and oil dependent economy. Absolutely. And then, like we said, the U.S. interstate highway system was signed during this time. This was by Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1956, so right after World War II. You might be wondering, why did we feel the need to create an interstate highway system right after World War II? It is because of communism. This is when we had the Cold War. Basically what the Cold War is right after World War II, America was like, we won, so I want to spread capitalism and democracy all over everything. And the Soviet Union was like, but we did a lot of the work to win, so we would like to spread communism and create more power for our leaders across the world as well. And so we were just like trying to see who was going to be the bigger like country boss with the Soviet Union. And then we were like, we have bombs. And the Soviet Union was like, well, we also have bombs. Checkmate. So that's what was going on during this time, just to give context. So this law authorized the construction of a 41,000-mile network of interstate highways, and it allocated $26 billion to pay for them. And under the terms of the law, the federal government would pay 90% of the construction. And this came from an increased gasoline tax is how they decided to pay for it. And the new interstate highways were controlled access expressways. So they had underpasses and overpasses instead of intersections. So like how you get on like the on-ramp, that's what that is instead of it being a light. They were at least 4 lanes and were designed for high-speed driving. They were intended to serve several purposes. One, eliminate traffic congestion. I don't know about you, but every time I've been on I-95, I don't feel as though the congestion has been eliminated. I'm feeling as though we just moved it all to one area, is how I feel. Also, replace what one highway advocate called undesirable slum areas with pristine ribbons of concrete. What they mean by that, I'll say the quiet part out loud. They wanted to take neighborhoods of color and make roads instead and just kick those people out. And they wanted to make coast-to-coast transportation more efficient. And this is the key part, make it easy to get out of the city in case of an atomic attack. Because like I said, Cold War. So they were like, if the Soviets get to bombing, I need to get in my GM American, I need to get in my car, I need to get on that road and get out. One man was scared. And now we have 41,000 miles of highways, even more now. They cover this in Lessons on Chemistry on Apple TV. So immediate cons to the interstate highway system. It was first passed, most Americans supported it, but unpleasant consequences began to show. Most of all was the damage on the roads that were inflicting on city neighborhoods in their path. They displaced people from their homes, sliced communities in half, and led to abandonment and decay in city after city. And these communities were usually communities of color in cities that they would basically forcibly buy these people houses and then like shove them out. This is also the same era when they stopped building public housing being used or built for Black people, destroying Black housing and prohibiting the creation of more housing. So according to the estimates from the U.S. Department of Transportation, more than 475,000 households and more than 1 million people were displaced nationwide because of the federal roadway construction. Hulking highways cut through neighborhoods and darkened and disrupted pedestrian landscape, worsened air quality, and destroyed property value. So the people that did own their homes, really the homes had no value anymore. And communities lost churches, green spaces, and whole swaths of homes. And they also lost small businesses that provided jobs and kept money circulating in crucial middle-class neighborhoods that were already struggling from racist zoning policies, disinvestment, and white flight. I have a stream about that. It's called like Trash 1950s if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But the car infrastructure is continuing to grow and it's somehow getting worse. One of the most influential post-World War II planners, Robert Moses, oversaw all public works projects in New York, including the array of roadways, bridges, tunnels, housing, and parks. Not only is he one of the most powerful unelected officials in New York history, but his highway policy extended well beyond New York because they took what happened in New York and were like, let's do this other places. He was a leading proponent that believed the best way to get rid of slums was to build highways through them. He said, our categorical imperative action is to clear the slums. We can't let minorities dictate that this century-old shore will be put off for another generation or finally abandoned. Oh my God. To say in 1959, this century-old shore to get rid of these people, sir, a century ago, slavery existed. You're really saying that with your whole chest. And he said that highway construction must go right through cities, not around them. And two of the city's main arteries he created, the Bronx and Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, did just that, cutting right through the heart of the Bronx and Red Hook neighborhoods. Misredacted, I'm working on my BS in civil engineering and I'll dedicate my career to whatever you want me to. Death to cars. This is your job. So a specific example of this is in Miami. Miami had a really thriving Black community, or has a really thriving Black community in Overtown that was widely considered the Harlem of the South. But after that 1956 bill, they created I-95 all the way through Miami. And this destroyed 87 acres of housing and commercial property in the community. And only 8,000 of the 40,000 people that lived there ended up staying after the highway was expanded. They were blocked from moving into white neighborhoods because it was the 1950s. So displaced residents were forced to crowd in nearby sections of the city that were already struggling with poverty and urban decay. And a 70-year-old, this article is from like 5 or 6 years ago, so she's older now. A 70-year-old Overtown resident, General White, said, there's nothing but a big overpass now. Overtown was never the same. And Mr. General White and thousands of other people here were forced out to make room for the highway. So this is some before pictures from this neighborhood in Miami Overtown. So you can see it was literally housing like people, and then you can see the old style cars. Speaking of cars, 3 frame houses in Overtown on 2nd Court across from the meat market. Literally just you can see it's a community, apartment houses in the neighborhood. And then this is what it looks like now. So this is that area. Like right here. These houses were where this little intersection is. And then now this is what it looks like. Well, I think this is from a couple years ago. There's more high rises now, but I digress. So that's one specific example. Another one is what happened in Los Angeles. What a lovely community now. Yep. Some roads and concrete. Love that for us. So the Black population of West Adams Heights started taking off in the 1930s after the Great Depression, when many of the historic mansions were still up for sale, and middle class and upper class of Black folks from LA and other cities began making their homes in West Adams Heights, renaming it Sugar Hill as a tribute to Harlem. So this became an iconic Black neighborhood, and by the 1940s, around 57 Black families lived in this area. When they constructed the Santa Monica Freeway, they did it through the middle of Sugar Hill in the early 1960s. This was a huge loss for the Black community of LA and the United States as a whole, where Black neighborhoods were routinely destroyed in the name of highways on more than one occasion. The road could have been built without cutting through the Sugar Hill section. However, in order to miss Sugar Hill, then it would have had to cut through the Fraternity Row and Sorority Row area around USC. Sorority and Fraternity Row still stands and Sugar Hill doesn't, so you know who won out. Lots of connections to other streams. Watch the history of Greek life if you haven't. So there were people fighting this at this time. The first victory of the anti-highway movement was in San Francisco, where the Board of Supervisors stopped the construction of a double-decker highway along the waterfront. So nice that they got it done in one place. And then in the 1960s in New York, Baltimore, and DC, and New Orleans, other cities managed to prevent road builders from eviscerating neighborhoods. So many urban interstates end very abruptly, and activists call this roads to nowhere. So if you're ever driving on an interstate and you feel like it just ends very awkwardly and you have to exit and it's weird, that's probably why, because they were probably building it and someone prevented it. So unfortunately, oh, that would have been a shame for those pals in Greek life. Oh no. Unfortunately, the car lobby is stronger than the anti-highway movement. For as long as there have been cars, car manufacturers have been aggressively seeking to shape our cities for one primary reason: to design cities that will help them sell more cars. The irony is that the main challenge plaguing cities today is an excess of cars. You can't fix problems you're in by using the same solution to get here. This is like an urban city expert guy. So in 2021 alone, General Motors spent $9 million lobbying, Toyota spent $6 million, and Hyundai spent $1.2 million. And although these automakers are now shifting towards electric cars, they've also been lobbying to weaken fuel economy standards as well. What car companies do is they're constantly and successfully lobbying, and then they occasionally put out into the public a distracting vision. It usually reflects an expectation of car use and even car dependency. So even though they're now like, we're electric, we love, it's still a car. Like a car is a car. There's lots of science to discuss, but I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to keep it brief. Cars consume a lot of energy before they even make it to the road because they have steel, rubber, glass. All these things have big footprints in production. And when a car dies, that doesn't even mark the end of its environmental impact. They have toxic battery, they have plastics, they have lots of things that stay in the environment forever. Junkyard pileups are becoming smaller than they used to because we recycle more. Metal can be recycled much easier than plastic. Plastic recycling is kind of a myth. Like, it is better than nothing, but plastic recycling will not save us. It should be like your last resort is to recycle it. reduce and reuse always come before recycle. But anyway, I digress. So production, recycling, and disposal costs to the environment are difficult to quantify, and they're mostly out of the control of consumers. But this is also true of the automobile's environmental impact. 80 or 90% of the impact will be due to fuel consumption and emissions of air pollution and greenhouse gases. And the level of this impact is very much under the control of the driver. So they're saying drive less to save money, but we have to go to work. I have to go to work and we don't have public transportation. That's not a helpful answer. And vehicles are America's biggest air quality compromiser. They produce about 1/3 of our pollution. A huge percentage of microplastics is from car tires. Not going to lie, though, I cannot do a paper straw. I don't know why we're even discussing the paper straws, because they make those little bamboo straws that are really good. They're biodegradable. They can stay in like a drink for a long time. They don't break. Like, I don't see why anyone even uses paper at all. It's shocking to me. Why are we still trying with the paper? We have better options. I get you don't want plastic, but do you remember in lockdown and how it undid so much of the pollution, right? I also feel bad that I literally burp into the microphone like 8 times when I record because I'm always drinking soda. But anyway, I digress. The vehicles are bad for the environment, and they make auto emissions a health concern as well, especially for people with asthma. So where does that leave us? This is a map of the public transport coverage in Europe compared to the United States. I think that this is quite sobering. To clarify, the purple is where we have public transportation. Also, someone in Mexico discovered a way to use avocado pits as straws. See what I'm saying? Like, we have so many smart people. We have options. We don't have to live like this. Oh, honey, we messed up. This is embarrassing. I have to say, this is very embarrassing. So, how did transit become such an afterthought? This is from a different article. Transit everywhere suffered a serious decline after the war because the cost of cars dropped and because of those new expressways. And the U.S. did not see a resurgence of transit spending until the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which we talked about a little bit. But there was a big difference between the way Americans approached urban transit and the way that Canadians and Europeans did. That's why I think it's really comparable, because World War II destroyed Europe, so they had to rebuild their transportation systems after this. So we're building them at similar times. Even when the United States took the time to build expensive rail systems, it never took care of the basics. They did not provide good, frequent local connections that would allow people to get to the rail station without walking or driving. To this day, in most American cities, it's impossible to get anywhere on a Sunday 8 p.m. by transit. And if you miss the bus, you might be waiting an hour or more for the next one. And such a situation is virtually unheard of in most developed countries, where many small villages even have a regular bus that operates on a much faster schedule than American buses do. And the fundamental problem that makes transit useless in most American cities is useless for most. The fact that we don't have a good way to get to the transit is why it never works, because we don't have frequent enough stops and they don't go fast enough, so people don't have a way to get there. The key to great transit service is not about getting 100% of people to ride transit for 100% of trips. It's about giving people a choice where they don't have to drive, because you lose the point if you drive to the train station to get on a train and then you still have to drive home. That's kind of like we're losing the plot. Like Americans, Europeans saw cars as the wave of the future after World War II, and they became a symbol of post-war construction like the Beetle, and European cities had to make plans to accommodate this, like bulldozing many historic neighborhoods, many of which were already destroyed in the war, to make wide roads for parking. Urban areas expanded dramatically with the construction of suburbs and new towns in Europe as well. The important difference is that in Europe, vehicle ownership was not nearly as high as it was in the United States. So even though those other cities are getting cars and expanding bigger, it's not like everyone has a car. So they still really had to prioritize mass transit. So European planners designed suburbs in a way that made transit still viable, and many towns were built around the train and metro stations. So where our first thought was to make highways, their first thought was, okay, let's build the town around a train station. So we just like approached it with kind of two different goals in mind. And early suburbs like Levittown and other areas were built along highways and had no transit service at all, and they're almost all still built on the model of the 1940s, single-family homes on isolated streets with stores surrounded by parking lots that were a decent drive away. And like, for example, a suburb outside Stockholm in Switzerland? Swedish? I always forget which one is which. Like, which words go together for the countries of Europe because I'm an uneducated American. Anyway, the Swedes built rail infrastructure through built-up areas as extremely expensive, but building it through farmland was comparatively cheap. So this model was used in other cities as well. Instead of building highways first, which tend to make neighborhoods auto-centric, they put transit first in rural areas, then built the neighborhood around it. And in the U.S., there were no significant rail projects between the 30s and the 60s. And then in the 70s, Amtrak had the project, the Northeast Corridor Improvement Project. They had to rebuild its engineering expertise, which was a great expense, so it ended up going super over budget. It cost about the same as a project in Paris that was dedicated for high-speed trains, but they still failed to meet their goal of offering high-speed rail in the U.S. So a private company went super over budget and failed. Shocking. This is also another straight from BuzzFeed article. I might not read this one because it's a little bit like personal to her life, but basically she talks about how she is used to doing car travel, blah, blah, blah. She grew up in the suburbs. And then when she went to college, she was on a very walkable campus, and it made her realize that it was a lot more sociable and easy to talk to people when you're in a walkable neighborhood. That's why everyone says, oh, college was the good old days. And I don't feel that way. And I think part of it is because most people, that's the first time in their life they ever lived in a walkable community. I did not live in a walkable community when I was in college. So I feel like that's my disconnect from that. So she realized when she went back to Houston, became exhausting to keep friendships because took a long time to go see people, and you didn't just like run into them naturally. And like the highways really didn't help, and it would take 7 hours to get there on foot and things like that. So this researcher has a YouTube channel, Echo Gecko, about urban planning, and they said the spontaneous encounters with friends and strangers are much more difficult in car-dependent suburbs. We especially noticed this when COVID happened. And a major study from the American Psychological Association found that pandemic mitigation measures were small but significant increase in loneliness among people in the United States, and this is especially true for children, the elderly, and people that are disabled. So distance and isolation are fundamentally built into our urban areas. Defined by the U.S. Census Bureau, any area with at least 5,000 people. The U.S. Census Bureau says that that's urban. I personally disagree. State and local governments prioritize building infrastructure for cars, and public transportation is very underfunded, so it's very unreliable. And wide roads and parking lots spread everything out, and they make walking extremely, extremely difficult. And today, because a majority of Americans, including an increasing number of children and the elderly, live in car-centric areas, our ability to form connections is limited, because if you're a baby or you're super old, you probably can't drive a car. So you don't even have a form of transportation. So our car infrastructure is also ableist in a way, because you have to be able to operate the car to really like have freedom and transportation. So not everyone who studies urban planning believes that rethinking car-centric communities will reduce loneliness. But for a lot of people, they believe it would make a difference. And there's data to show that both car-heavy places and a lack of access to transit have a detrimental effect on socializing and sense of community, like I said, especially for people who cannot drive. So I just felt like the social aspect of it was very, very interesting as well. And a study from 2021 found that most Americans make their friends at work, then school, then existing friendships, then their neighborhood, then houses of worship, and then clubs and organizations. But the way most American cities, towns, and suburbs have been designed makes it increasingly difficult to access those spaces and those places because our country is built for cars, not built for people. So this is kind of more of what we already talked about, that it was not always like this. I'm going to skip through some of this. Like I said, it's kind of a lot of the same thing with some more data. I feel like if we had public transportation, we would all get along better. We would be happier. We would be healthier. We would be prettier. You know what I mean? I wish I could bake a cake of rainbows and smiles and a electric mass transit system that spread across the whole US and we could all eat it and be happy. If we got to live in a car-centric society, I wish it was at least like Wisteria Lane. So these were the sources that I used for tonight. This was kind of a bitch to put together, but I did really enjoy it. I felt like this was very, very interesting. And I also want to do a poll question to chat about what we want to do next week. I don't have an idea for next week, so I have a couple options for you. I'm going to do a poll in the... Sorry, whenever my mic is here, it like covers my keyboard, but I don't type when I'm on here, so it's normally fine. But I'm going to do a poll on here. So these are our options for what we could do next week. A lot of people last week, let me type this up so I don't get distracted. The Civil War stuff is an option. Reconstruction series. The Way Down Diet Lady. Who is that? We have a lot of choices, so give me a second. We're not going to do those because we already did them. I'll give you all a choice between 3. All right, so, and actually it might not even end up being these 3. Last stream that I did, I mentioned, and people seemed very, very into me using the slides that I use with my students. Because normally it takes me and my students like 2 days to cover one topic, and we do like 45 minutes per day. So I could cover one topic in a stream for you all. Or I was thinking I have some ideas for series. So I just kind of wanted to like pick your brains and see what we're thinking here. So I could do a 2-part series about the Civil War. So part 1 would be like the causes of the Civil War, like years leading up. And then part 2 would be like actually during the war, like what happened. But it would be more like social stuff and less like, this is the kind of gun, this is the kind of bullet, like... We'd go over like some general strategy, but we're not going to go like battle by battle. That's just not that interesting to me. So one idea is a series on the Civil War. Another idea, a series about Reconstruction. Reconstruction is after the Civil War. Basically, when our country was like, oh, damn, we just freed like millions of people from slavery, and we also destroyed our entire nation by being at war with each other. What are we going to do about that? And they had to like put the country back together, and they had the Freedmen's Bureau, and that's when the KKK started, and like things were super corrupt and racist in the South, and it was just like a lot. So we would do a 2-part. One would be Reconstruction. And then what a lot of people don't know is after the Civil War, there was a corrupt bargain in Congress that ended Reconstruction. So we would do like part 1, the years of Reconstruction. Part 2, the new South. Because they said like, we did it. We rebuilt the South. But it was really just like same shit, different day. So that could be one, is 2-part Reconstruction series. Some 1-part ideas. We already did these 2, so I'm going to skip over those. I have different slides, so maybe we'll do them another time, but we really already covered a lot of this. So one idea I have is immigration in the Gilded Age. So basically, when our country was becoming industrialized, the government was like, let's let in a fuck ton of immigrants and let these companies exploit the shit out of them. We could talk about that. And then that's also where we got a lot of like xenophobic views from. That is when our country first started to be like, this is our land. We were born here, even though like your grandpa moved here. So relax. So one would be like immigration during the Gilded Age, or we could do like Gilded Age reforms, but I'm not really feeling these 2. So I'm going to give you a choice of 3, the Civil War, Reconstruction, or immigration. I'm glad you like the Gilded Age. My students are so over it. How do I vote for all of them? We will probably do all of them at some point in time, but I'll let you go ahead and vote right now. So far, I'm seeing Reconstructions doing really well. I kind of feel like history is cyclical. History is cyclical. One thing about history is it's cyclical. I was going to say I feel like we need to do Civil War before Reconstruction, but we really don't, because I could just give you like a quick 5-minute recap. And again, these would literally be the slides that I use with my students. I have a lot of in here knowledge that I would talk about, but the slides, I can show them to you. Actually, no, I can't because I'm not logged in on this account. But they're very they have lots of pictures. Y'all will like them, but they're not like we do with the scroll and all that. Is none of that. There is some videos though. Would be cool to do Civil War and then Reconstruction. Would love a long series on all that. Maybe we might be into that. All right, I'm going to do another poll to see where we're at with that. What we would prefer. I'm moving this, sorry. What do you want? Civil War, then Reconstruction. I'm running out of characters, just FYI. All right. And then, okay. And someone said I would very much be down for a Gilded Age stream at some point. Most of my ancestry came to the US at that time. I'm really thinking that is in here that would be a cool thing to do as well. And I will say the immigration Gilded Age, I think, is its own topic, but I do have a really good labor movement and industrialization video, or that should be in the other order. Industrialization, then the labor movement. I have 2 really good videos of that on YouTube, and they're those are some of my favorite streams I've done. That's my favorite thing to teach. I just got finished with that with my students. I think it's just absolutely fascinating, but I probably still will do the immigration Gilded Age. Okay, so far I'm seeing the biggest win is Civil War, then Reconstruction. I forgot to give you a just Civil War option. So I think we'll do that. Next week we'll talk about the causes of the Civil War. We'll do a month-long Civil War Reconstruction series. We're really in our history era. And this is good. You know another reason why this is good? Because I have been wanting to... Actually, let me go ahead and start the game while we're doing this. So this is a trivia game. I'm going to say goodnight to you, TikTok. Love you so much. This is a trivia game about what we learned about. It's all multiple choice because I'm not evil. And it's literally just for funsies. The winner doesn't get anything except for the clout. Which one do you guys want to do? We never do Himalaya. We're going to do Himalaya. I'm making an executive decision. So you can join from your phone. Make sure you're legally allowed to use your slides from school. Some states let schools claim slides as intellectual property of the school. Great call out. And I will tell you that I paid for these with my own money on my own Gmail account and keep them housed in my own little universe. The school is borrowing them from me, not vice versa. Also, I just don't see my admin really wanting to go down that rabbit hole, or my district. They have enough problems to deal with. But anyway, let me go ahead and put the link to this in the chat. And yes, you should always, if you're a teacher creator, or honestly, you're a creator and you work in any kind of business, check your contract, check those things, protect yourself, because you never know what's going to happen. This is great because this is what I'm going to be teaching the next month. So this is a little game you can play. I will let you join. There's the directions. If you want to put your name in, you can. If you don't, just put something funny. Don't put anything weird or racist because that's not funny. But anyway, what was I going to tell you? Damn it. Oh, it's kind of good that y'all are into this Civil War Reconstruction thing, because then I won't have to make new slides because I already have the slides. I'm going to add stuff in and I'll do little extra lore type of stuff and add some more detail about some stuff that I think is cool and interesting. And we can honestly watch little videos and all of that stuff. It's really going to be very much giving school vibes, just so you know. But part of the reason I'm excited is because now I normally make these on Sundays. I'll have a little bit more time to be working on. I have a second YouTube channel. If you know, you know. I will send it to you. Give me a second to pull it up. I have a second YouTube channel that's very education-y, and I'm going to be doing some history videos on there. Not deep dives, like not what you and I do here on stream. That's not what's happening there. And that channel is like very PG, can be used at school. I just sent it in the chat, but those are going to be really short videos, like 5-10 minutes, so that other teachers can use them in class and just like teachers for themselves. Right now, it's a lot of like teacher tech stuff. You know, this is giving Passionate College Lecture, and I'm here for it. I'm glad. So yeah, just wanted to share that that does exist as well. I want to give you guys another poll. I know you're probably like switching between a million devices and you're so mad at me, but I just really like hearing from you all. I am curious. Okay. What do we prefer? The pop culture, the history, or the mix of both? I'm not a teacher, but I watched the entire first day of school video because it's fascinating how you prep for a new year. The first day of school is a pain in the ass. Like the first day of school requires so much work. Really, the first 3 weeks is like hell. Okay, so maybe what we'll do is we will do a Civil War series, take a little mini break, undo some pop culture stuff, and then come back with Reconstruction. Mix of both, but heavy on the history. Okay, good to know. Because I just said we're going to do this Civil War Reconstruction thing, I realized that's like a month long, so I just wanted to kind of we'll just play it out. After I do the Civil War, I'll see how you guys are feeling. I'm going to wait for this poll to end, and then I'm going to start the game. Love the Bravo streams. I do love a Bravo stream, but I was kind of running out of ideas. So I feel like if I do history for a while, I'll come up with other pop culture ideas. Nah, split screen on the iPad, all good. All right. I'm going to go ahead and start the game. I'm going to send the link in the chat again. It will let you join if you're late. You just probably won't win. Also, a lot of people ask me, like, why don't we tie if we got all of them right? It rates you on if you got it right and how fast you were. Do you like 90 Day Fiancé? I used to love it, but I haven't seen it in years. Okay, let's play the freaking game. Intimate crowd tonight. What did we learn about today? Boats, the nightmare. It was cars. I lied. I always wonder. Okay, good. Everyone got that right. I always wonder when people get the first one wrong. When were electric vehicles invented? This is a hard question because we talked about this at the very beginning. I'm happy you all are happy. That's all I want is for you to be happy. I want to be happy. I want you to be happy. My ring is stuck in my hair. Sometime in the 1830s. Oh, I love a boat. I think that's like one of my whiter traits. I would say the whitest thing about me is that I love ranch dressing. Like, I fucking love ranch dressing. Also, on my other YouTube, I don't curse, which is really hard, which is why I will never give you all up, because this is my freedom. What was our most common form of transport in cities in the 1800s? I hope you like the picture ones. Ford escaped this planet. That's funny. Also, with the history, none of it gets copyrighted. Can we do a Cars the movie stream or a cinematic world breakdown? What was the high point of electric cars in America? This one's hard too. Ranch recommendations. Wingstop Ranch. I love Wingstop Ranch. Also, I buy ranch. I go to like a international market and they have ranch there just for me. I get it there, and then I really like, I can never remember what it's called. So let me look it up and I'll find it for you. I have a picture of it in my phone. This ranch. I'll show you when we're done with the game. Just remind me, because it's a very specific one. That's one of my favorites. That's like the best grocery store ranch in my opinion. What was the company that's involved in the streetcar conspiracy? Respectfully, you got me fucked up with that year question. Yeah, I know. Did y'all a little dirty with that? What about a Disney lore stream? I'm afraid of the Disney adults, but I am open to it. Just blank percent of people were driving, the tracks were so crowded. I forgot to put the blank. Once blank percent of people were driving. Oh, y'all are slaying on this one. Because this one was very shocking to me, so I mentioned it a few times. Man, I need to get acrylic nails again so I stop like subconsciously scratching my head, because that's actually like my worst habit ever. I am a little terrified of Disney. They'll sue you. They don't care. And I don't have the lawyers for that. How did Henry Ford lower the cost of cars? They will sue for real. No, like they will come to my house and like strangle me. We got you. Are y'all lawyers? I love that, but I don't think y'all are lawyers. There might be one lawyer here. Maybe a British monarchy stream, but they'll sue too. They got enough to deal with right now. Oh, damn it. I fucking forgot to delete the answer. They're all right. Because I put these in my notes app, and then I copy and paste them into the questions, and I forgot to delete the answer. This is like one time I printed a quiz for my students, and the answers were in bold. I was like, oh, I'm actually an idiot. And the worst part was not all of them got hundreds. That's being a teacher for you. The Federal Highway Act of what year created our interstate system after World War II? If you know about World War II, I gave you the answer. I like to give questions like that, where if you just like figure out the question and use background knowledge, you can figure it out even if you don't know the answer. What are some negatives of our car culture in the United States? Why are there always Nazis being first is literally perfect. Because I had kind of forgotten about that with Henry Ford. I'm glad someone brought it up, because it was in the back of my brain, but I was like, is that true? I don't know. And then someone brought it up, and I was like, yeah, that is true. You reminded me, and it is true. You yanked it from back there. There's always Nazis. Date questions are my enemy. Same. Alrighty. Nice job in first place with the best name. Why are there always Nazis? Ford escaped this planet. Caitlin, sovereign economic state. A streetcar named Desire. A highways of parking lots. Patrick, a Ka-Chow parking lot. Gluten, cheeseburger queen. Lily Gutsfason. Melly Lynn, asparagus dino nugget. Bring back streetcars. Lightning McQueen. Scoop, Narwhal, Beth, Huds. Ann's, nice job. Ash E, Michael J, I have no idea what's going on. And D Money, read through all of them because we had an intimate crowd tonight. Here is the best ranch dressing. This is the ranch dressing. This is the best ranch dressing. I love this ranch. Great ranch. Comes in a squeeze bottle. 10 out of 10. Any memes, anything I missed, anything we want to share, thank you all so much for being here. I really liked this topic. I'm excited to get into more of the history stuff with you all. I know we're all hating on cars, but I bought a car for myself for the first time today. Congratulations! Congrats! Because like I said in my first slide, we live in a car-filled hell, and it's not our fault. So I am proud of you for buying your first car, because that is a very, very big accomplishment, and they're very expensive. You, Cars the Nightmare, the guy she told you not to worry about, Cars 2006, critically acclaimed masterpiece. We both have Honda CR-Vs, but you bought yours, and I got mine as a Nepo baby, so yours is better than mine. A Honda CR-V really is the American dream. The American dream used to be a house, 2 cars, 2 kids. Now the American dream is a studio apartment, no roommates, and a Honda CR-V that's within the last 10 years. That's the new achievable American dream, I think. So I will leave us off there. Thank you so much for being here. I'm here every single Tuesday at 7 p.m. I'm also very close to 10,000 followers on Twitch and on YouTube, so I would appreciate a subscribe, a follow, whatever platform you are watching this on. That's our new deal, except we have to pay for it ourselves. Yes, the engine is made out of engine. So have a great rest of your night. Love you.